Oh, that one's up, but that one and that one.
Oh, I think.
Okay, good. Hello, everyone. It's time to get started again. We're running on, we're running slightly late. Welcome to the next session. Until lunchtime, we're going to talk about the DNS and data protection. And our first speaker is Suzy from Armenia, who is going to tell us actually all about data protection. So welcome, Suzy. Get started.
Thank you. At first, I want to introduce myself. I'm Suzy from Armenia. I'm a student at Yerevan State University, Faculty of Law. Now I'm studying, and at first I want to introduce what is the data protection, because IT sphere without data protection, we can say, is very weak. So, what we need to know at first about our data protection. Okay. At first, we should know the meaning of terms. For example, at first, data, the whole information about individuals. The second, protection, the system of methods that we can protect personal information. And also we have a data controller. What is data controller? Physical or legal person or organization which cultivates personal information. And also we have a data processor, a physical or legal person or organization that that control the cultivation of data protection. And we also have the data subject. The data subject is the person, physical person, who can be identified to protect the rights. Okay, the next. At first, we should know that data protection is a fundamental right. That is, as a fundamental right, it's connected with national and international laws and legislation. As an international legislation, they include some acts about protection. What is it? We have two important steps. At first, it's the Data Protection Act 19 and 98, and also the second is the most important, and I think it's the great agreement that European Unions agrees to sign, and it is a GDPR, that is General Data Protection Regulations. But at first, we speak about the Data Protection Act. What is it? As I have already mentioned, it's a very important step in our data protection life, we may say. It has three principles. What the principles there are? At first, fee for viewing the data. For example, you want to have your copies about your data, you must find, and there is a fee based on, depending on what kind of service you want. For example, educational, health, or etc. Also, the second principle is that correct the incorrect information. It means the person, as we have already know, the data subject can correct the incorrect information. And there is also the third principle, and there is don't use the data for database marketing. That means that the data subject should give the attention and said if want to correct the information or not to correct. And also we have some some principles about data protection in general. And there is principles too. For example, the first principle is information shall be kept for specific purposes, and also the purposes should be lawfully. And the technical measures shall be taken against a loss of data. And also there is a third principle in general. It is protection of data, data protection, shall not be transferred outside the European Union countries. I will speak about it a little bit later because I want to explain what is GDPR in general. Then I can explain what is the third principle. Okay. The second act and the most important step in field of data protection is GDPR. As I have already mentioned, what is GDPR? General Data Protection Regulations. The protection of personal data is a fundamental right, we have already mentioned. That is why a new legal framework will be applied on May 25. It will be in force after May 25. And also, most people share their personal data with organizations, businesses, and we put more information, more personal information into virtual life, into virtual world than in real life, in real world. That's why the General Data Protection Regulation is most important step in our lives and also in the field of protection, of data protection. So, the GDPR has many fields, but there are some fundamental rights that's very important. At first, rights of the data subject. It means that the information, any subject, any data subject can send, can give, can get the copies that you want to see. Where is the data? Where the data is put on? And so it is the rights of the data subject. But we also have data breach reporting. For example, we have already know the data controller, the organization, and also the data processor, we may say. Okay, within 72 hours, if there was any violation connected with data, with personal information, the organization, as a data controller, should inform to data processor. Otherwise, there is a for failure to report, there is penalties, and also it is annually for businesses, for huge companies, it is very huge. And the penalties, it is the third fundamental right for GDPR, up to 2 million euros for companies, for businesses. That's why for companies and for businesses, for huge companies, it's important to have GDPR if they are European Union's countries. And for non-European countries, they should have compliance national legislation connected with GDPR. Otherwise, there are penalties. And there is a fourth most important fundamental right for GDPR, and it is the applicable worldwide. Our data, our personal information are stored as long as we, as data subjects, we want to store it. Okay. And also there are new rights. For example, that have not the Act of Data Protection 1998, because the former is local and it's signed in United Kingdom, but GDPR is for European Unions and also for non-European Unions countries. About new rights, the right of access. You can request a free copy of your stored data by a particular company. The company is the organization, and we have already mentioned that it's a controller who has cultivated the data. And also we have a processor, data processor, who control the cultivating of our data, of our personal information. As we remembered, because I have already mentioned that in the Act of Protection, in the Act of Data Protection 1998, we can get our copies for our data protection, but there is a fee. In GDPR, there is no fee. The right to be forgotten, what is it? you can withdraw the consent you have given for the use of your personal data, and they can remove it. They can forget about you, about your personal information. That's why the right is called right to be forgotten. And also we have the right to the data portability. We can transfer our data whenever you want from one server to another server. And for example, the right to be informed at the outset of any request for data, businesses must be as clear as possible. It means that people can get their data protection copies also, we have already mentioned, and there is no fee. But there are some rights too, for example, right to ratification. Where we have already mentioned it in personal data, in protection of personal data. In general, there is a fundamental right as when your personal data are incorrect, you can correct it. As we know, the data subject can apply to data controller, and the data controller, as the organization, should correct the incorrect information about the data subject. The right to processing. What is the right to processing? Simply said, you right to limit the processing of your personal data, and the data subject decide when you want to use the data, the personal information, and also right to object. You can stop and say, I don't want that you, your organization, the data controller can have access, can have control to my data, to my personal information, and I want to remove it. I have already mentioned about it, and also we have notification right. What is notification right? About notification right, we have already mentioned it in general data protection, because it's a fundamental right and also reflected and impacts on GDPRs. That is, in the event of a breach of data, the controller, the organization, should inform the processor who is controlling cultivating of data, informed within 72 hours. If it's a failure for reporting, there is penalties, and as I have already mentioned, it's very huge for companies, for big companies, for businesses, more than annually 20 million euros. And also, we have already mentioned about GDPR's principles, but we may say that you are now interested maybe in how the GDPR is working. The GDPR based on agreement that one part is data controller, the other part is data processor. That's the agreement must be done freely at first, only for correct purposes and lawfully. The cultivation of subjects' rights can have high risks, so the compliance with ISO 27001 is a one and only independent and internationally recognized security standard. And the GDPR should be compliant with this ISO. So, what is DPO? It's Data Protection Officer, because for implementation of GDPR, we should have an officer, a GDPR body, we can say. There is a special officer for data protection. The officer deals with especially monitoring and also connection with government. And also, commissioners' advice I can on GDPR implementation and about WHOIS system, what they want. They want to change it to make it private, and also to find a bridge between public policy objectives and compliance with GDPR. And also, I want to mention that RIPE NCC shares its GDPR compliance model, and that is, it contains all registration details, also contact details of responsible people and contact details of resource holders. What it means? At first, contains all registration details. It means that the database on RIPE NCC database, there are on WHOIS, and what is WHOIS? It's a platform that we can see our personal information that we have already given. The database keep all this, and also there is a registration detail, we called it, and also we have responsible people, and for lawfully purposes, the organization, such as controller, as we know, can connect it with responsible people who is responsible for the personal data for individuals. And also contact details of resource holders. Resource holders can be both legal or natural persons. When the person is legal persons, there is some differences, because for legal persons there is other person that maintain and doing the same work within and for legal persons. They're called maintainers. And about removal of personal data. Resource holder can apply for removing the data. We have already mentioned it, because it's fundamental, right? That it's the data subjects, right? For example, he or she can apply to get copies, and he or she can apply to remove all the data, all the personal information. And about what is the idea of data protection? Because it is important, we should know why we need it. Is there any advantages for data or GDPR, or can it implement in our real life? At first, now it's actual topic, because data protection is the serious problem now for our world. Because it is problem. We put more and more information. We share our personal information, our data with many businesses, with many organizations, and everyone, every citizen, every person should know that the personal information is protected. And GDPR is now very important, because it is one more step to go for safely protection. And also, what I want to do as a lawyer, as a future lawyer, I have an example. Just imagine we are the country surrounded with many enemies, but we haven't any weapon, we are not armed. And that's why in real life we have, for example, internet technologies, but we haven't protection, and that's why let's be protected with our information with GDPR, and also with our knowledges. Every person must know that her rights are safe in virtual world, and also in real life too. And what influence can GDPR have on Eastern Europe and Armenia, because I am from Armenia? The main problem is the cybercrime. What is it means? I should speak about it. The rate of cybercrime, for example, in Armenia increases, according to the Armenian policy annual report to the Armenian government. And also, as an Armenian government, we have some rules, some regulations about, not about GDPR, but about data protection. And GDPR's influence on non-European countries, because the agreement is based on fundamental rights, and also it is for European Union countries. But I have already mentioned that it will be compliance with non-European countries' national legislation, because there were penalties are very huge, annually 2 million euro, and it's a huge sum. And so, European countries, it's shown on my presentation, Andorra, Argentina, Canada, and many countries, European countries, have already signed it. And the GDPR will come in force after 25 of May. So, but there are many, many countries, for example, Iran, for example, our country, Armenia, that are not European Union, but it's not problem. We must have the decision. We must have a decision to have some national regulations compliance with GDPR. But you have interested in now, maybe, but why we need to have it if we are not European Union country, and why we should find, will find annually 2 million euro. I want to say that GDPR is a platform. For example, when you want to go to court, to apply to court, it's a platform based on that you can protect your information, your personal information, your rights easily. And also, not only countries, but everyone need to be informed about GDPR. Citizens, it's no matter if we are European Union countries or not. And also, GDPR is the weapon that everyone needs. And GDPR cares for productive protection. And it has a regulation. If the person isn't agree with the rules, they will never sign an agreement. And it's my reference list. Thank you. I think you have many questions about it because, as I guess, there are many IT masters, IT experts, and I have also want to know in the room, is there lawyers there or not? Okay. Do you have any questions
If
about
anyone
GDPR?
has any questions, please line up at the microphone and remember to say who you are. Any questions? All right. Well, I have a question because
Okay.
I'm Philip Paps. I wear many hats, but I'm a member of the internet community. So you mentioned that the GDPR affects people who process personal information which I have given to someone. What about personal information which I have not given to someone? Imagine social media networks which scrape the internet with information given to them by other people. Imagine, someone has just taken a photo of me and is going to upload it to something like Facebook and put my name on it. Suddenly, Facebook has my personal information. They have my face and they have my name. What can I do? Is there anything I can do? It's my personal information.
Thank you. It's a good question and connected with our GDPR. At first, we should know what is the personal information. For example, we have already know that personal information, our name, surname, email addresses, IP addresses, it's all our personal information. What about our pictures? Yes. For example, you mentioned it on Facebook. Okay. It is our personal information too. And if you know that someone can grab your picture, for example, at first you can't apply to court because it's out of GDPR, because you have a contract with Facebook. And Facebook regulations mention that we can grab your picture and it's not a violation. But if it's out of Facebook, it's actually the violations of data protection, and you can apply to court, and GDPR is a platform that you can based on in court.
All right, that's good news. I will be suing Facebook in March or in May or whenever. Anyone else have any questions? No? Well, that must mean your presentation was very clear and precise. Thank you very much for this important topic. Our next presenter is Nishal from PCH, who is hiding at the back of the room. Run, Nishal. And Nishal will be presenting about the Quad 9 free, secure DNS resolver run by PCH and other organizations. Thank you, Nishal.
It's only half true. I was only half hiding. I was warned that after coming to the microphone so many times yesterday, that there'd be a long line of questions for me today. And all I can say is, bring it. So for those of you that were not here yesterday, my name is Nishal Gobidan. I'm an internet analyst at Packet Clearinghouse. And I'm here today not to talk about Packet Clearinghouse, but to talk in this session on data privacy about something that's fundamental to what we all do and what we all use on the internet every day. Every day, as part of you doing any transaction on the internet, you use the domain name system. And if you're not sure what this is, I've got a very quick 5-minute catch-up for you. The domain name system is effectively the phone book system of the internet. I think we all know this very well, and it's the simple thing that translates a domain, a name that is significant to us, like www.example.net, to an IP address. That IP address is the thing that's symbolic to the computer, the network that we're trying to use, and well, that's how we connect to a resource on the internet. And of course, anything that's attached to the internet needs to have this idea of how to do this kind of DNS translation, right? So here you're talking not just about smart desktops, not just about smartphones, but also about the more connected internet of stupid things, as some of us like to call them. So your online television, yeah, you're laughing, you know what I'm talking about, right? And all of this happens in the background. The DNS process happens in the background, and as a user of the internet, you're largely unaware of it. I mean, my mum uses the internet all the time. She's starting to love watching Netflix, all the Bollywood movies and all of that, but she has no idea what DNS is. And that's really, really scary. It's scary that something that's so fundamental to what she's using every day is something that, well, she's never, ever, ever had to worry about and never, ever, ever had to touch. And it's scary because it's something that she doesn't know anything about, and it's something that a lot of people do not know anything about. It's something that it's like the soft, chewy center of a sweet, you know? It's something that you want to get to, something you want to use, but it's something that's easy to corrupt. So the DNS, because it's this fundamental tool that we all need to use, makes a very, very attractive center for criminals. And unfortunately, for those of you that are involved in network security, you'll know that the DNS has, over years, become an increasingly attractive source for people trying to do nasty things on the internet. I'm speaking about this. I'm speaking to you about DNS and DNS attacks and safety and privacy on the scope of what happened, 2 days ago, I guess now, when, if you're following the news, there was a large BGP hijack which was done to intercept the DNS servers for a network that was running some kind of Bitcoin application type of thing. Now, I don't believe in the Bitcoin stuff. That's not for the discussion here. But what was interesting was the sophistication behind the attack that was launched to take out Amazon DNS servers so that, well, somebody could steal money off on the side. Attacks are growing. We need to be vigilant. We need to be aware, I guess, firstly. And we need to be vigilant. And aside from just being aware and vigilant, we need to know how to process and how to move forward. So we need intelligent mechanisms for securing the DNS, because if we don't do that, and if we continue to give criminals this easy, soft, chewy center that they can look for, well, they're going to take advantage of it, right? And the key issue here is that it's not your laptop that you're talking about. It's not your phone. So for those of you that have Android phones and walk around with antivirus software, for those of you that have Windows machines or even Macs, you think, okay, I can protect these things. But how many of you have a smart TV or a smart fridge? And when's the last time you tried to upload an antivirus program to your smart TV or smart fridge? Anyone? No? How many of you have a smart TV where the software vendor or the hardware vendor no longer produces firmware for it? You bought a TV because it was cool, it came with an Ethernet port, but somewhere along the line, the manufacturer just decided they didn't want to support it. I'm guilty, right? I thought an Ethernet-connected TV would be really cool in the lounge. So again, DNS is a critical weak point, and we need to find ways to secure and resolve this. So the very quick 5-minute update for those of you that aren't aware of what DNS is or how it works, this is what it is. We've got a user, the user's pulling up a web browser, and the user's trying to get to www.example.com. And for that to work, the user has to have access to a recursive resolver, a full service resolver, a caching DNS server, call it what you want. The idea is that this is the DNS machine that's going to figure out the IP address of example.com. And one of two things can happen, right? First, the user is going to send the request to the DNS server, and he's going to say, hey, I'm trying to get to example.com. Please, can you send me the IP address? And as I said, one of two things is going to happen. The recursive resolver is going to know about this. It's going to know about this because it has it in its cache. And if it's got it in a copy of its local cache, it's going to respond immediately, and it's going to say, oh, okay, I know about this. And the answer that you're looking for, here it is, and it replies to that. It replies back into the user. And that's the best case scenario. That's the case that we'd like to wish happens all the time. But no DNS server knows everything. And for the DNS servers that do not know about, it doesn't have something in its cache, what it then needs to do is it needs to follow the next part of what we'd call DNS resolution. It contacts the DNS root server. It contacts the DNS root server. And here's where the first part of how people understand DNS works. Here's the first problem that happens. You'd think that it's trying to get to www.example.net. So if I'm going to contact the root server, I should be saying, how do I get to .net? But it doesn't. Your DNS server typically sends the entire request across. It says, how do I get to www.example.com? Now, of course, the root name servers don't know about example.com or example.net. It replies with the information for .net, and you go through the process over and over again. It's the iterative DNS recursive process. You find the .net name server, you ask the .net name server, how do I get to www.example.net? Again, you're sending the entire query, right? The .net name server doesn't know this. The .net name server responds with the answers for example.net, and hopefully example.net is alive. Hopefully example.net knows the answer, and hopefully example.net is going to give us the correct answer. If you're going to complain about why I didn't use IPv6, it's just because it's longer to write in the slides, so please give me a break about that. But eventually the answer gets back to the user, and this is only the part of the process, right? This was the part of trying to get the IP address. The next bit is, how do I then make a connection? So then your web browser fires up, and your web browser then makes a connection to the web server, and, well, you conduct the internet transaction that you wanted to. So all good. I think that's the bit, as I said, I'm going to do that in less than 5 minutes, because that's the bit that we all understand. But there's some serious problems with this. There's some serious problems with the way the DNS that we use across the internet is built and works every day. The first problem, as I've already mentioned, is that when you send your request for www.example.net, well, the first problem is that the server that you're talking to, the recursive resolver, captures your information. It captures the IP address that you're coming from. And there was a very good presentation up on the stage just now that spoke about things that matter to you, things that should matter to you, your data, your identity online. When you're online, your IP address is considered in a lot of jurisdictions as personal identifiable information, okay? Because your IP can be used to track what you're doing on the internet, could be used to build a rich history of what you've been doing on the internet. And here, the recursive resolver in the middle has an understanding of who you are and what you're asking for. And they can do this, and they do this, not just for the first request, for example.net that you've sent through, but for every single DNS request that you're sending. So they're in a very, very strong position to build a very, very rich history of all the things that you're trying to do on the internet. How many of you run recursive DNS resolvers? One, okay, I see about 12 hands up. How many of you capture the IP addresses of the people that speak to you? 1, 2. How many of you don't want to answer? Well, you're not going to answer that as well, all right? So you understand that the cache in the middle, the DNS resolver, becomes a very, very rich source of your history, and that's a problem. I mean, that should be a problem, let me say it that way. As somebody that cares about what I'm doing on the internet, and this isn't a right or wrong question. It's not a, do you have something to hide, or why are you trying to block what you're doing? It's, I'm an individual. I'm entitled to my privacy on the internet. And I'd like for my service provider not to have to track any of that information, at least not, not unless they have a legal reason to do it. So, the first problem that we have identified is the capture of this personal identifiable information. The second problem that I want to talk about is that a lot of infrastructure needs to go into running and supporting recursive resolvers. And for those of you that run recursive resolvers, and those of you that have done this for a long time, and here long is about 20 years now, you'll know that they come with a rich series of problems that might occur. Some of the problems that occur are, being vulnerable to denial of service attacks, being vulnerable to cache poisoning, being vulnerable to where you house these servers. So often you're limited to 1 or 2 machines in 1 or 2 locations. And you've heard about Anycast yesterday, and I guess people now know that Anycast is a really, really good way to split your load. But even if you're using Anycast, unless the network that you're using has taken the time and effort to understand the layout of how you're using the network, of how the internet fits in, often you're going to get redirected to a service that's sometimes thousands of kilometers away with little regard for your performance. And performance should matter to you because, let's be honest, it's the internet. Nobody really, really wants a slower version of the internet, right? So trying to not get your data being pushed into other regions is good for 2 reasons. I've already mentioned the performance issue, but the other real problem on the internet is that when your traffic moves across a jurisdiction that you have no control over, you can almost certainly be guaranteed that the environment that you're going into, they're looking into your traffic. They're trying to see what you're doing. And if you don't believe, well, I don't know if anybody doesn't believe that people don't spy on you on the internet anymore. This is all an open secret now. Snowden made it very, very public about 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, so the key issue is that the further away you are, the more likely your DNS traffic is going to be exposed to let's call them interested parties while it's in transit. Because your traffic is obviously going to go far away, and it has to. In the context of how the DNS works, the DNS isn't centralized, okay? The DNS is decentralized across the planet. And in the context of how your recursive name server has to speak to the root server, it has to speak to the GTLD servers or the CCTLD servers, and then, well, whatever else is under it, it's obviously got to move, it's got to send packets backwards and forwards across the internet. But every time it puts a packet out on the wire trying to get 1 bit closer to the next answer, that packet is vulnerable to interception. Not just interception by legal purposes, but interception for malicious purposes. So if you can hijack, if you can take over, if you can provide the incorrect answer for someone's domain, there's real value in that if you're a criminal. Because if you can hijack www.mybank.com and make it point to a website that looks like mybank.com, well, you can guess what the less clueful people are going to be doing, right? So this distance, this idea that we're moving packets backwards and forwards across the internet, and by the way, these packets are generally not encrypted. That's a problem. So, let's continue talking about more problems. I'm being signaled that I should speak faster. I hope I don't stress out the interpreters. So, when we talk about having a cache miss, I already explained that if the answer is not in the DNS server's cache, it's then got to contact the root server. The root servers, if they're not in your country, if they're not easily contactable to you, are far away, they're subject to interception. But on top of all of that, a lot of authoritative servers, the people that manage auth servers, and people that would manage, for example, and this is just an example, the .nishal TLD if it existed, if they were really trying to monetize things, one of the things that they would be able to do is they would be able to capture all the source IPs, they would be able to capture all the requests, and they would go out to professional organizations, and yes, these exist, professional organizations that would monetize that for them, okay? I'm not going to pick on names. I think it's unfair to pick on a particular name of an organization that does this. But there are folks that their sole purpose in life is to take DNS logs and then generate revenue for this. And they do this with great success, mind you. Okay? So authoritative name server requests, the logs in authoritative name servers are often easily parsed and monetized. The other problem, sorry, I'm trying to multitask. That's probably a bad idea if I'm a man. The other problem, and I've hinted at this already, when you're dealing with sending packets backwards and forwards across the internet, again, putting packets out on the wire, as I've said, they're unauthenticated. Now, not everybody is doing DNSSEC. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the internet that we live in. And because not everyone's doing intersect, I've already mentioned that packets can be easily intercepted, packets can be easily captured, and the response is changed. And because there's no DNSSEC authentication at the end of it, you have no way of knowing if the packets that were intercepted and the answer that's being provided to you is actually the correct answer. So, that's not a good thing. You don't want to be in a position where you've asked a question, you've got an answer, and not knowing if the answer that you've gotten is incorrect. Because frankly, how many people know the IP addresses of the web servers, the websites, or the resource that they're trying to get to across the internet at the top of their head? Not many. I mean, I don't think anybody here remembers the IP addresses for probably your home web servers, even if you're using these, right? Your company web servers. Then we also have to deal with issues like shared fate attacks. So attacks against authoritative servers can leave things like DNS servers in the middle, recursive servers, unfortunately open to any kind of abuse. An attack against an authoritative server can quickly disable a recursive server simply because the recursive servers aren't able to get answers back and they keep querying, a backlog of queries tries, and well, the recursive server just doesn't respond or responds with really high latency. But let's talk about some of the solutions. And before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about Quad 9. Philip was only partly correct. PCH doesn't run Quad 9. We're one of the organizations that's responsible in setting up Quad 9. And there were three at the start. There was IBM Security, there was the Global Cybersecurity Alliance, and there was PCH. I usually don't like to talk about this, but one thing that we've noticed since Quad 9 was launched last year in November is people ask two questions. And people are suspicious, okay? Don't you find by nature people are suspicious? Philip's laughing at me. Because the first question people ask when you tell them something is free is that they say, what's in it for you? That's the first question. You're all laughing at me now, yes? Okay, you're all suspicious people. So I put this slide up, and I put the next three quick slides up just to tell you what role each of these three organizations plays and to answer that what's in it for you question. IBM provided the 9.9.9.0 prefix, and in addition, IBM provides things like threat analysis feeds or threat intelligence feeds. So a list of bad IP addresses or IP addresses that are hosting malware on the internet. That's all that they do. Okay? Global Cybersecurity Alliance came up with the idea for having the secure server, and they provided funding for the project. And PCH, well, we run the infrastructure in the background. We've built the Anycast network. But PCH themselves, as an organization, we don't run the Quad 9 service. Quad 9 is a completely separate organization that just uses the network that we've built, and they deliver Quad 9 on top of that. I'm saying this so you know that at no point do people like IBM employees have access to Quad 9 data. As a PCH staff employee, I have no access to any of the Quad 9 data, except for maybe looking at some of the anonymized statistics that they're producing. And, well, it's the same for the GCA folk, okay? Let's talk very quickly about how Quad 9 is helping to solve some of these problems. So, the very first issue that we're trying to solve is the issue of security. And the issue of security is really, how do I prevent myself from getting to an IP address that's going to get me, or resource on the internet that's going to get me into trouble. It's going to land me against some sort of malware page or something like that. So there's very little scope for something like a man-in-the-middle attack with the Quad 9 infrastructure. Because what happens is that it uses the PCH network. Now the PCH network, if those of you that know what we do, we've probably got the largest DNS Anycast network in the world. Root server operators use this resource. TLD operators use this resource. Secondary level operators, probably some famous shopping sites, and some of you probably use, or router vendors and things like that, use us to host their DNS services. Because everything is in one box. We host this at about 177 locations across the world, I think. But because all of this is in one, I call them one box, but let's call them one stack, okay, there's very little scope for packets moving all backwards and forwards across the internet. Because you can get the answer from a root server, you can get the answer generally from the TLD that you're trying to get to, you can get the answer generally from the SLD out of one little stack. There's very little opportunity for a miscreant to take over or inject or do anything nasty to the packets that's flowing backwards and forwards, because it's all flowing, well, within the same stack, okay? So that's the first part. That's the first part of how we do it. We make the path to getting your DNS answer much, much, much shorter. But then on top of that, quietly and in the background and by default, and it's something that cannot be disabled, all answers are DNSSEC. All answers are DNSSEC. We do perform DNSSEC cryptographic validation of the answers. So whether you like it or not, Quad9's doing DNSSEC validation. So if somebody does hijack a domain and they do try to insert invalid information, and if the domain was signed at the start, you can be pretty certain that the answer you're going to get back, at least from Quad9, is going to be the real answer, or oops, there's an error, the service is unavailable. And if you're the owner of the service, or if you know the person that owns the service, you can immediately say, hang on, there's a problem here, and that'll point you to perhaps an attack or an error with the DNSSEC validation or anything like that. Okay? We were talking yesterday about privacy. I came to the microphone and I said, does this, oh dear. And I said, does it scare you? Using ECS, I was asking the guy that was running the Anycast network, does it scare you the amount of information that's leaked to the internet? Now, if you could see the slides, and you can probably see them, you'll see this online, you'll see, there you go. You'll see the information that's leaked. I did this from a server in Johannesburg, all right? You'll see the information that's leaked generally to a server on the other side, the DNS server on the other side, when something like ECS is supported. I'm not going to go through it all, but I did this in Johannesburg, so that I wouldn't expose information from here. And you can see the country code is ZA, South Africa, IP address. And this is the IP address of the network that I was connected to. They've got the mask incorrect. But they've got information in there that a DNS server shouldn't really know about. I mean, all they really needed to know that I was potentially coming from South Africa. And at best case, the city that I was in. But I mean, even just knowing the general locale was good enough, okay? It worries me that people use services like ECS without understanding the problems and the amount of data that you're exposing. And that's one of the things that Quad9 does. It makes sure that no information about what you're accessing, no information about what you're doing is exposed to anybody. So there's, if you follow Twitter, if you follow the nonsense that you hear about sometimes on the internet, I can tell you there's no logging of your IP address. That's it, no logging of your IP address. So if you query baddomain.com, we will log the fact that there was a query to baddomain.com and whether it was a good query or a bad query, in other words, whether we were able to answer it or not. But who you were, what your IP address was, that personal identifiable information, that's never ever logged. So at worst, if we were ever hacked, or if Quad9, I should say, was ever hacked, they can't steal your information. There's no information to steal. Okay? So that makes it really easy to do things like become compliant with GDPR because, well, we have no data to keep. So for those of you that are wondering what information is exposed, nothing. Okay? Quad9 doesn't store or collect any personal identifiable information. And for those of you that are worried about your queries being intercepted, getting to Quad9, well, Quad9 was one of the earliest to support DNS over TLS, so that's there. Quad9 does not support DNS over HTTP yet. That's still a developing standard. If, like me, you worry about privacy and security, you probably are worried about DNS over HTTP. I'm not sure I trust all the browser vendors more than I necessarily trust the operating system that I run. If I was using FreeBSD, I'm a lot more comfortable with the FreeBSD Foundation doing my DNS queries, or FreeBSD doing my DNS requests, than some arbitrary browser provider. I'm going to speed up a bit, so I'm not going to go through all of these. One of the key things about the Quad9 network is also its performance differentiators. It's no truth that the internet's still developing in the global south. That's how where I come from it's referred to, right? The global south, but that's underdeveloped, everything under the equator. And it's no secret that the networks, when they try to put in DNS service, when they put in information stores, when they put in clouds, when they put in resources, they tend to favor putting the resources in the more developed parts of the world, because of course this is where their markets are. One of the things that Quad9 is really proud about is that they're all over the world. So in 177 locations and growing. It's my job to make the PCH network grow, which means the Quad9 network is going to grow out of that. So we don't make distinctions about which part of the world we should be in. If there's somebody that's willing to host the infrastructure that we're willing to make available, we'd love to be in that part of the world. It's that simple, okay? And we're usually connected directly to internet exchange points, which means that we try to maximize performance for everybody. One of my favorite things, though, is less about performance. It's less about the tech stuff. I work for a nonprofit. I actually work for two nonprofits, PCH and another nonprofit back in my country. And the nice thing about working for a nonprofit is that your business model is very different, okay? When your business model is that you're a nonprofit that's trying to do good for the internet, you can't be bought. Nobody can do a corporate takeover of what you're doing, okay? So you don't have a corporate overlord that you need to make money for as such. When you don't have to worry about making money as a return of investment for your shareholders, then the focus of what you're doing is very different. And the focus of what you're doing can then be restricted or can then be put entirely in favor of something like making sure we are, well, providing the best possible service we are. So in this case, Quad9 is the only DNS service, it's the only large DNS service that's run and owned by a non-profit. Everything else that you'd think about all the ones that you saw in the examples yesterday, all the ones that you popularly know, all of those are run by for-profit companies. And even though some of them may claim to have strong privacy policies, the truth is, at the end of the day, they still have to maximize their revenue. So there's going to be information leakage some which way or the other. I'm going to leave that out for a bit. He's telling me I have 5 minutes left, so there are other solutions that you can, there are other IP addresses that are available or that will be available. For those of you that like the Quad9 service or that don't want the malware filtering that Quadware provides, there's 9.9.9.10. Of course, there's IPv6 everywhere. And it's important to mention that Quad9 provides security. It's the malware filtering that's important. It's making sure that your refrigerator doesn't perform or become part of a DDoS botnet. We don't do censorship at all. So while it may or may not upset you that we do not censor pornography, for example, that's a dicey question. It might be good for some people, it might be bad for some people. We don't make those distinctions. What we do filter, and the only thing that Quad9 filters, is malware. Because regardless of how you feel about it, malware is a bad thing. So that's taken off the internet. There's a whitelisting service that's available. So if you do see there's a problem, please let the Quad9 team know. And that's it. I'm missing a slide that tells you the locations that they were at. I think it was in the other deck. I apologize. But the slide is old. When Quad9 went live last year, it was at 100 locations. Since then, it's increased. So now I would say it's probably at about 130 odd locations. Our target for this year, the end of the year, is to be up in about 150 locations. But that's a soft target. We're hoping to do much more than that. Thank you. And I think I have 1 minute for questions, which means that there can't be a lot of them.
Right. Thank you, Nishal, for staying on time. You have about 1 minute and 30 seconds for questions. So that's whoever gets to the microphone first gets to ask the question. So, all right. That's 3 people I can count. Okay, alphabetical order. Babak is always going to win. Remember to say who you are for the live stream.
Babak Farokhi from Imam Paris Technologies. Actually, I have 9 questions, but I have to cut it short. Maybe we can do it offline. So, for sake of clarity, you're not doing EDNS client subnet. So you're not passing the subnet information upstream.
That is correct.
Great. That's great. Because this is scary. It's really scary. People may not know about it in detail, but it's really scary.
That is correct.
So the second question, you do QNAME minimization?
So we actually run 2 different, I didn't speak about the architecture because we didn't have time for that, but we run 2 different variants of software, and I'll mention them. We use PowerDNS and we use Unbound. Unbound has QNAME minimization, so if you get to a node and the node hits the Unbound request, then you'll get QNAME minimization. The other software that we're using is PowerDNS, which doesn't do QNAME minimization yet, so you're getting a mix of that. When QNAME minimization becomes available, we will definitely support it because we believe it's a good thing.
Yes, we have to ask Bert Hubert to implement it in. Yeah, great. So the next question is that you're doing DNS over TLS, which is great, but how about DTLS? Is DTLS also supported?
DTLS?
Yes, DNS over DTLS, which is basically TLS over UDP.
I will confirm and let you know.
Yes, even because it wasn't standardized in Deprive IETF working group, and I was wondering if it's supported. And the last one is that you said you're not keeping any log of the DNS queries, which is great.
Yes.
But are you maybe passing it real time to any software or feeding it to
So
some?
let me be absolutely clear about this. The source IP address is not logged, so it cannot be stored by us. It's never written to disk. It's not even put into any other kind of transient memory which can be sucked by a supernatural being or something like that. We do not pass no IP information is passed to anybody else. What we do is we keep aggregated logs of networks. So for example, AS1, we would aggregate all the addresses that perhaps come into AS1. So we'd log that AS1 had 100,000 queries, for example, and that's it. But even if we tell the AS1 provider, hey, network AS1, there were 100,000 queries, we can't give him the IP addresses that queried stuff because, well, we don't keep those. We don't have those anymore. And the reason that we do that, the reason that we keep records that it came out of AS1 is that if there's ever a case where there's a sudden increase in attack from an area that we have a direct relationship with an operator, we're then able to reach out to that operator directly to say, excuse me, do you know that you have this problem in your network? And that's it. So we could tell a network that suddenly their attack vectors increased, or they're sending us lots more queries. But that's about that's about all we could do, really.
Thank you very much.
I will check the other question, and I will respond to you directly, and I'll post it on the MENOG mailing list.
So I would love to take more questions, but we are really we are on negative time. So we need to have the next speaker. So you should ask Michel during lunchtime. Otherwise, we will not have time to eat, and eating is very important.
It's all about the security and high availability. As you said, that the source IP address is like leaking the security, but in other words, it's like ease of use.
Yes, but okay, we can take this up during the lunch break. Nishal is easy to recognize. He is the man wearing the tag saying Nishal. So thank you, Nishal, for your presentation on Quad 9. I'm sure you will have lots of questions during your lunch break. Our next speaker is right in the front row. Run, jog while I introduce you. Our next speaker is Ali Reza from KMU, who is going to talk to us about proactive implementation through the DNS, which I believe is on RPZ. Thank you. You have about half an hour, or you will eat into lunchtime.
All right, good afternoon. The presentation will be in Farsi. Please grab your headphones. سلام و خیر مقدم عرض میکنم خدمت حضار محترم. 20 دقیقه بیشتر وقتتون رو نمیگیرم. میخوام راجع به موضوع DNS Firewall بیشتر باهاتون صحبت کنم، اینکه ما چطور میتونیم از DNS برای پروتکت کردن شبکه‌مون استفاده کنیم.
I'm going to talk about security challenges that we have in the current networks, methods, the current networks that we are using to stand against attacks. DNS and DNSSEC is something I've talked about. A new method we have called DNS RPZ, and threat intelligence, and ultimately machine learning, which is a technique that I've implemented on DNS in order to identify malicious requests, or rather foresee them beforehand through machine learning. My name is Ali Vaziri. I'm a network engineer. I've been working in security in networks for the past 10 years. Over the past 2 years, I've been working on botnets and protection. I like threat hunting and threat intelligence, botnets, spams, phishing. The problems that we have, these days, especially in Iran and in the region, as we say, botnets, spams, and phishing. And the whole, those who've been involved with botnets, hands up, please, over the past 3 months. Okay. Unfortunately, according to the latest spam statistics, we are on the 4th place in terms of number of bots on the Iranian network. There are various reasons for this. One is, unfortunately, many ADSL modems and IoT are not upgraded, or there are default username passwords on them. On the other hand, our providers, the bots, that they have, are not aware of the bots that they have in the net. Those who use shadow servers, hands up, please. Shadow server. Those who are using shadow server. 5, okay, are using shadow server. Now, and on our network, we use firewalls, IDPS, antiviruses, patch management. We do patch management, but are we secure? No, certainly not. No matter how much, the more secure you try to be, you won't be able to say you're absolutely secure in the end. On the other hand, recent years, everything has been encrypted. We can come to the end of the life of DPIs, because DPIs need a lot of resources to check the traffic. Everything, even malwares today, use encryption. On the other hand, malwares, each time they are distributed, they change their shape. That is, they can't allocate, they don't have a special signature. The last botnet that was Mirai, until the last minute, more than 1,000 signatures that we had recorded from it on the network. Every time it changed, it was polymorphic. Every time a new signature was produced. In RIPE 75 last year, I talked about NetFlow-based botnet detection. Most botnets and malwares are connected to a CNC net server. The list of these CNC servers are on the blacklists usually. All the NetFlow data that had to do with these, I entered them into a search engine, and through machine learning, I introduced them as targets, and I said these data are malicious from my point of view. Find similar data. With 90% approximation, we were able to get flows that were close to them and were connected to some CNC net servers whose IP addresses were not on the general blacklist. But after the conference, I found there's something missing here. Many of modern malwares use DNS. A large number of malicious domains we have, and there's something called fastflogs. In fastflogs, the botnet immediately registers, sets its IP on new nets, so that they won't be able to be detected. This name that you can see, if I use quant 8 and put a query on, you can see instantly it gives you the IP response. In DNS, in Iran, we filter the DNS, but unfortunately, we never do anything. We've never done anything about botnets. A URL that's on all public blacklists. It doesn't take much time to filter it. Now, control of DNS is, in fact, DNS-based malware control is very easy, cheap, fast, easy to deploy. But the DNS itself, by nature, has some security vulnerabilities and problems. As we know, DNS queries are stateless. You send the query, then response that you receive can not necessarily be correct answer. Integrity, there's no integrity checking. So in RFC 3833, threats of the existing DNSs are talked about. One of the ways in DNS to prevent DNS hijacking or response is not fiddled with is DNSSEC that everyone is familiar with. DNSSEC, very briefly, answers that coming from the server are signed with a key, throw the resolver. If it's been tampered with that key, it'll be dropped. But DNS RPZ is a technique that comes from level 8 onwards. this feature was deployed, you have a new zone, a special introducing the band. Within that zone, some names and IPs are entered. They said these names and IPs, from my point of view, should not be connected to. When you send a query to the bind, the answer is this domain doesn't exist, or you can redirect the user to another page. You can say, okay, you are entering another page. It could be a phishing attack. There might be malware. Please close it. The top line, which is highlighted in red, in yellow, is a response policy band zone called RPZ has been defined. That file down there is file zone is bands. We have a domain example, domain wildcard example have been blocked here. Example.com, star.example.com have been blocked. Quad DNS source storage, Quad 9, OpenDNS, Cloudflare have tried to stop botnets and malwares. The previous query that I had, I showed, look at it again. I used Quad 9 to send this query. This is one of the most famous Zeus botnets. Quad 9 immediately, you shouldn't be connected to it. It easily showed it. The zone that we have in RPZ can be automatically updated. You can get the feed, the blacklist from a Z from a blacklist through. I get manually. It can be added. One of the problems that we have in Iran is local threat intelligence in Iran. We don't have a blacklist or a list or a source to know through which to know which domain is phishing. I mean, as phishing occurs, we get to know in Telegram groups that there's phishing happening. I remember 2 years ago, my father had heard something about phishing. He asked me how he could be sure that this would be the same domain. I said, the name and the icon lock there should be seen. That's the SSL. Thank God to script SSL, script have SSL. The problem that we have in Iran today is that we don't have the domain things. I'm sorry I didn't get that. Ask him later. Many of a lot of spams being sent, loads of bots are being hosted. But this list has never been drawn up, has never existed before. Experimentally, I took some domains on the general blacklist and some domains that were on the trusted 1000 Alex trusted list. I looked at them. I separated some data, for example, Alex rank, Google page rank, number of subdomains, number of dashes in their names, domain age in who is, whether they had PTR record or not, or did it correspond to that, or the AS, what was the reputation of the AS number? All of these, I looked at all of these in order to see how it would be possible to, protect important services, that everything that we have, credit card information, etc., that we have are on them, PIR information out there, and many other people are, faced with phishing attacks in those domains. There's something called fuzzy logic that Google uses. Phishing, remember Shaparak phishing? There was an extra 8 or 1 lakh. In fuzzy domain, you look at the domain. If there's a character offset or added, it says this domain is similar to that one. Yesterday, there was something about non-ASCII domains, where there was an L, that this L is not on ASCII, but is similar to it, looks like it. I considered this in that experiment that I had done as well. The data sets that I had received from PhishTank, if you know this, and some RVLs were collected, the backgrounds of the domains were checked, all these were changed into training data. Right? There's a train book called Scikit. You put the data in it, you train the model, and after that, any new data that you give to it, it says, for example, depending on different classifiers and models, it says whether this data fits your data or model or not. It was like this. I checked the log DNS, the server port. I looked at the new domain. I added the new list of domains. I checked the blacklist as well. Then the new data I received from Alexa, Google PageRank, etc. And the model, the machine learning. I trained the model in the machine learning thing, and then ultimately I found whether a domain is malicious or not.
This is actually the outcome and the result of that I actually concluded from the domains that I analyzed, 1,000 domains that I trusted domains that I did with KNN. If you're familiar with the algorithm, that's what I used. And then I divided them into 50-50. 85.7% were successful in identifying whether a domain is trustworthy or not. I did the same thing with malicious and based on using those that existed inside Fishtank. Now, the DNS RPZ is not the only solution. Unfortunately, one of the abilities of the cloud providers is actually domain fronting. This capability that you're very much familiar with domain fronting, when there is actually traffic towards Google or ADSL, they cannot actually identify whether this traffic is malware or not. There could be something behind the Google service. It could be a CNC, which is actually hosting there. And the other problem that we have with RPZ is that they have no intervention in the direct contacts, and they just check the contacts. And the more significant problem that we have is that most of them are actually done on URL, and there are just some pages which are hosted there. What do we need actually? Unfortunately, as I noted in the other slide, we do not have public threat intelligence inside our country. On the second line, there are two structures which are written there. Who knows them? Anybody in the hall? This structural language is actually help you to identify the threats and the problems and the attacks, and to go through XML, for instance, and to be able to share them with the different hosts. It's actually a common language to understand the problems, the weaknesses, and even those which have become blacklisted. As I noted, we have the phishing with version new phishing. At most, we actually send 2 emails to one another. One of the other problems that we have is actually the issue of public resolver. Unfortunately, in Iran, we don't have any public resolvers. A public resolver which could actually work at a high level and to be able to deter some of these attacks. And at the same time, many of our other service providers are unaware of the problems that they have inside their systems. They're not able to counterattack the spams or other problems. Please use this free service. What you need to do is you identify your prefix inside them, and it will give you daily and weekly reports what is actually happening in your system, where you're attacking. It's a free of charge service which could actually help enhance Iran's status. It's actually published there in the Gita. So if you're interested, you could look at this, and if you have any questions, I'm at your disposal. متشکرم علیرضا از سخنرانی خیلی مختصرتون. ما 15 دقیقه برای پرسش وقت داریم، اما حضورتون از شود که از سوالایی که میپرسین وقت نهار خودتون رو میگیرید. خواهش میکنم خودتون رو معرفی بکنیم. My name is Payam Said. Hello. Thank you very much for your very interesting work. I was not actually expecting such good work, and it's been quite a long time that I'm after such an achievement. There is a major problem. I don't know if you can face it or not. There is about the port 80, which of course we need to have neutrality and so on and so forth. The problem that we have is that, for example, we email or we text message our clients, and they get angry with us, and and they become frustrated with what we're doing, and our colleagues are not really very important for us, or maybe they're customer oriented and they say it's actually the right of the customer. They have to pay attention to their own security. What is to be done in this regard? Now, I just want to tell you that there was a team from Germany, if you're familiar with the Avalanche network. Botnet used to actually sell them. They took down Avalanche, and last year, because of the problems that existed with Deutsche modem, and about 500,000 modems become contaminated, and of course they were threatened, and then they throttled the service of the customers, and because update can be actually sent to them, so they could actually update their systems. But the problem that you're talking about is actually it's about the working group, the abuse. RIPE itself cannot be in touch with the RLI, and there is a degree of law enforcement, and they propose a policy that we could come and see periodically to see what's happening. And all the discussions were about what to be done about the upstream. That's, of course, is a cultural debate and issue. The problem is, even if we find them and if we actually connect them to the user, probably the users will not do anything. If you restrict them, they would say anything. And the sales department tells us that, no, don't do this because you're going to use the customers. Hello? Omid Kosari from Shapti's company. What our friend actually said in line with this, I just wanted to say that I think that you are from an academic institution. I am the consultant of many different institutions. You are from a university. One of the problems that we have is that we know that security is a very important thing. And of course, too much of it is actually a problem. We need to have a balance between security and capability. We have an expression, an organization a few years ago. It said that they said that the best security procedure was that they closed down the servers. They would go home and then they would open their servers for security. If we want to have a lot of security, actually we get to that point. But the problem that we have at the level of providers is what actually our friend noted, that we need to have a balance between real using the system, and so that there won't be any problems, and of course commerce and sales, and of course the security. And this is very varying, and it doesn't show that it varies from one country to another. It could be different from one city to another city, and from one company to another company. Those who are providers here, they might actually say that our security, as the way we have it with our domestic procedures, are different from Tehran to Shiraz, and because of cultural factors, many other factors which are involved. So, and then I'd just like to give you another example as well. We were discussing CNC, and there was an organization who contacted me, and they had a major problem, and we had to take immediate action. And when we actually contact them, they asked me that, with whose permission did you do this? And when they, of course, realized that we'd done this temporarily, this is exactly what I want to ask. Security is a very important notion, but in your algorithms, have you been able to take into consideration the issues of marketing, commerce, culture, and so on and so forth? One of the issues which prevails is actually the botnet that I'm talking about. It's actually a multifaceted problem. I can relate one of a category of these problems to the institution which allows all modems to come in. Even the modem which does not allow you to change the password, for instance, this causes problems for users. This is multifaceted and multidimensional, but I do expect the ISPs to at least provide information for their own users to tell them what botnet is and how they could become contaminated. And for example, they might telephone you and they say that the traffic is being used, and now it might actually be very good if we could raise awareness among people. I am mostly concerned about and concentrating on on technical issues, but I believe that there are major cultural deficiencies in different aspects. Modem comes inside our country, and then that firm is actually that firm disappears, and this happens quite a lot. So, because they're only doing it for their own profit, I think that security has its own issues. And so, on behalf of all providers, and as a small provider here, I just want to say that because we have certain problems with security, we must not actually look at them from the angle of the operators only. It's actually more complicated. Thank you. خیلی متشکرم. خیلی ممنون. خب حضورتون از جلسه دیتا پروتکشن تموم شد و دیگه وقت نهار است. 45 دقیقه وقت داریم برای نهار و ساعت 2 مجددا شروع میکنیم و بحث‌های لایتنینگ و جلسه اختتامی. قبل از اینکه فرار کنیم بریم به سمت نهار، 4 تا در واقع پروب رایپ اطلس دارم. اگر علاقمند هستین، پیمان فکر کنم که شما هستین، لطفا بیاین نهار، بیاین به من بگین که چرا شما هست خوبی برای رایپ هستین. تشریف برین غذاتون رو بخورین. قربان شما. نه میریم بالاخره